Welcome everybody. Really looking forward to our executive briefing presented by Ndevr. Today's topic is Metrics Matter, a guide to using KPIs to drive business growth. And I'm joined by Rob Sheldrick from Ndevr. Hi Rob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Andrew.
Great. I'm really looking forward to your presentation today. You've got a really, I don't want to say a long history, but you've got a great amount of experience working across a number of fields. I won't go into that. We could go on for days and days. If anyone's interested in Rob's background, just jump on LinkedIn. If you're not connected already, connect with Rob on LinkedIn. A great resource, well worth chatting to on a number of fronts. I find Rob a source of wisdom on lots of things, but KPIs and metrics is one of those that we'll run through today. So I'm really looking forward to that. If you've got any questions as we go along, feel free. There's the chat box there. We're just on Zoom, so I assume most of you are pretty familiar with the platform. Put your questions into the chat or the Q&A. The Q&A is probably the best option there. And we'll get to them at the end. So Rob's going to present for roughly half an hour. And then we'll have time. Try and leave about 15 minutes if we can for Q&As. If we can't get around to all your questions, Rob will be happy to get in touch with you at another time. And that's a really good option as well, because Rob can maybe answer some questions specifically around your business and your needs. So that's a great option as well. We will be reaching out just to check in on how you found the webinar. So when we do that, feel free to take up the offer to have a chat with Rob. And we are recording the session. We can make recordings available. So if you're the note-taking type, don't stress about that. You can always rewatch it at a later time. All right, Rob, thanks for joining today. Maybe we'll just, if you can click through to the agenda slide, and we'll have a look at what you're going to cover today. So I think this is really one of those topics that sounds really easy on the face of it, but it's really about the implementation. So we're going to look around at what KPIs are, how to choose the right KPIs for a business. I know you've got some examples for us, Rob, that you'll run through. And then where the rubber meets the road, I guess, is some considerations, actually how we put these into practice. And that's where your experience will really come into play for us, Rob. And then tracking performance. Really, this session is all about using these tools for growth. And that's, I think, what we're all here for, is to improve our business, make our business lives easier, and ultimately grow our businesses. All right, so that's enough from me. I think I'll hand over to you, Rob, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation. So maybe kick us off with just a really quick run through of what KPIs are, or at least your definition of KPIs.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that, and thank you everybody for joining. One of the things I do want to say just the outset is I focused today in my life around working with mid-sized businesses that are going through their journey. So there'll be some people on this session, I suspect, that will know as much as me around this topic, but also for those people, I think it's a good refresher around some of the things that we've worked out. So let's start with the base idea of what is a KPI. Look, there's plenty of textbook examples out there. I think for me personally, I like a pretty simple view of the world. It needs to be something that is about your goals and targets. So you need to decide as a business what are the right things for you to do to target on improving that follow your trajectory of where you want to go, and then set up a KPI to measure that. So first of all, it needs to be a measurable value. It needs to tell us how we're going against the target that we've set. So pretty simple in that sense. I lend towards the smart KPI concept, though, of including in that it's very specific about something you're trying to do, incredibly measurable, so you know that the thing you're doing, you actually know what's going on and you can measure it, versus, say, some other areas where it's a little bit in the air and you're guessing about what it is. That's not as helpful as you'd want it to be. It should be something that's attainable. I support stretch goals in organisations is one of the things, but KPIs really should be talking to something you want to achieve. It's relevant to what your business is. So, if you're talking about being an organisation that sells $1 million dozers to the mining industry, stock turns on dozers is probably not something that's relevant. But if you're dealing with Coles or Woolworths selling FMCG goods as such, then stock turns is something that's probably important. And for Coles and Woolworths directly, That's how they make their money, on turning stock in a low margin industry. And it also needs to be time bound. It needs to be something that's driven by, we're going to record it over a month, over a 6-week period, a year, whatever it is, but it's got some timing to it. I think the other thing that's important is that they tend to be KPIs leading and lagging. So you need to get the right balance, that not everything can be after the facts and not everything can be all about the future. Hope that makes some sense to start off, Andrew.
That made a great deal of sense, I think. Thanks, Rob. So it's one thing, I guess, to say what KPIs are. But what's the point in having a KPI? Why do we need them? I'm sure you're going to say we definitely do. So sell it to me. Tell me why we need those KPIs.
Yeah, so I like to think of simple terms that you're driving a car on the road. That obviously, apart from looking out the window, you're looking at the dashboard and working out what's going on. It's also a good analogy for me because whilst cars today actually have a lot of information in their computers, you don't want 50 things sitting in front of your eyes to work out what you want to know your speed, probably how your fuel's going, and maybe, if you're like me, towing a caravan, how your tyre pressure is going and so on. So, the things that really are important about why you have a KPI is that they actually tell us how we're going against our goals. So goals are always the point. That's why you have a KPI, to see how you're going against the goals. So that's obvious. I think the other thing is that it takes a pulse of the business at any given time of how it's going and how healthy are we for what we're looking to achieve. You get trends by KPIs. So seeing, that you've had a new product go into the market and understand that it's selling in certain territories rather than other territories, it gives you a trend of where you're going, so you can see you're getting the right level of uptick. Or the other way around, you're actually, you're 4 weeks into a new product and you've suddenly been kicked off the shelves in certain stores and you're starting to see a reduction in sales and those trends. The other thing that's important there is that I think uncovering warning signs. So KPIs can tell you that something's blown up, or maybe even not blown up, it's just outside of the parameters. It gives you information around what that is. And the last thing is that they let you know whether the goal itself needs to be adjusted or not. So it's not unusual to set a goal believing, hey, that's the right thing to do. And then when you go along the journey and you see the results, you go, well, we're not really going to get anything from doing that. So yes, we've got 20% improvement, but what's the point of that? So they help sharpen your thinking around that space.
Really good overview there, Rob. Thanks for that. I guess, like you said, this is probably a refresher for a lot of people. People probably sort of know roughly what a KPI is. Good to have the refresher there. People know why they're important or have a sense that they are important. I guess probably what a lot of people may have trouble with is picking the right KPIs or choosing KPIs. Maybe I think you can run us through now some thoughts on that. And I think this is something that a lot of people will be interested in, because you've probably seen it done well and you've probably seen it done poorly over the years as well.
Yeah, look, and I feel to add to that, I've done it well sometimes and I've done it poorly too. It's a reality of checking yourself and making adjustments. So the first thing about KPIs is, does it really matter for the business? So for me, the example of having the right one is if you're looking at inventory turns, which is an old favourite that consultants will spit out there from looking at warehousing and so on. But if you're a construction company that is purchasing all of your goods and sending it straight to site to be used on constructing a house or whatever it is, inventory turns is probably not a great one to use for you, because it's not going to do anything for you to find out that you can move turns around and so on. The other thing for me is that where you are somebody that needs to get it, so as I've said earlier, Coles, Woolworths, low margin businesses, that they make money, say 1% on an item going through, but they make money by turning it through the shelves. So they need to have KPIs that reflect how that's turning. The other thing is, do they align with the goal? Well, this is a given, but it's often when you sit down and talk to people, you find this is an area that sometimes goes awry. You're setting goals for the business to take you forward, whether that be the next year, the next 5 years, whatever it may be. And you've already decided they're the right goals that are actually, if we deliver those, we're going to get the growth we want, or we're going to see improvement, customer satisfaction, if that's what it is, and so on. And then people find that they go and set other things in there. So what for me you need to do is always assess if we do this KPI or move this KPI dial to the right place, is it actually growing a business goal? And one example here, maybe not totally KPI related, is years ago I worked for Goodman Fielder, Australia's largest food company at the time, And they went to a stage where I think they did some really good stuff around every capital spend had to be associated with one of the three, not 50, business goals that were spread around the organisation. Now, this was an organisation at the time that had something like 20,000 employees. And so, it was a way to make sure everybody was aligned. KPIs should be the same thing, leading you forward around the goals you've decided to do. So the next thing is to make them measurable and realistic. So there's no point having something that you can't measure. So, aspirationally, we want to actually be thought of better in the marketplace. We want people to make us the first choice when they think they want to buy gift cards or whatever it may be. So how do you measure that? How is that something that you work out? Now, it might be you measure it by doing surveys in the marketplace, and then it becomes measurable. But it can't just be we feel like we're doing this stuff. It's got to be something that's realistic and something you can turn on. The next one for me is it's got to show trends as such. KPIs shouldn't be a one-off. Yes, we achieved 20% turnover on our stock, if I use that one again. What you want to see is when that's changing and what's happening about that. And KPIs do go up and down. The old loon landing story that we all know, that for only 3% was the rocket actually heading towards the moon. For the other 97, it was adjustments. So trends tell you stories and then allow you to do things. I think this one's really important because I live and breathe in the mid-market space with businesses that are on a journey. You have to reflect where you are on your journey in your KPIs. It's no good having a corporate focus with the things that make sense for some of Australia's largest businesses if you're a $20 million business or a $100 million business. So you really need to look at the KPIs that match where you are in your growth. So if customer service is really important to you, that's the thing that's going to drive you forward. Have KPIs around that. But if you've got 20 customers and you're only dealing with them, you may not need to go and have satisfaction surveys in front of those guys at this stage. When you're 500 customers, it may make more sense. So certainly your KPI should match where you're at in your journey. And lastly, for me, it's got to be about improvement. KPIs have to actually be something that's going to tell you, yes, if I do this, I'm going to get some value from it, extra revenue, extra retention, whatever it may be. They shouldn't just be there to make you feel good, see a number that you want to see.
That's great. Nice little framework there, Rob. I think a lot of people can probably take those away and use the slide on screen right now to come up with some KPIs that are relevant to their business. I guess there's probably a number of metrics or KPIs that are common for a lot of businesses. So maybe you can just run us through some of those, the ones that you see a lot, and you can run through those and how they may be applicable.
Sure. So look, I'll start by saying that there's a lot of KPIs out there. You can Google around and read textbooks and so on, but I'll just share some of the ones that I've come across that are consistent and probably in some of the better organisations. Now, that I'm not sitting here today saying everybody must do the individual KPIs, but they're things to think about. So if we think about the financial side, operating cash flow. So if you're an organisation that's very cash driven, and it's important to you to keep on top of that stuff and know that your working capital is going the right way and working for you, then you need to measure the operational cash flow. Now, for many on this call, that's going to be given. It's going to be something that you already do as such. But interestingly enough, in some of the smaller mid-sized businesses, they measure it by looking at the bank. And so there's better ways to do those sorts of things. Obviously, making your capital work for you. So having an assets divided by the liabilities ratio is something we can make sure if you're putting money into the business from a capital point of view, you're getting something out of it that actually makes some sense. The next two are around outstanding. So whether that be your payables that you've got, so how are you pushing the money out to your suppliers and so on. In some organisations, in different journeys, they're looking to sort of take advantage by pushing that out. Now, there's a few more things the government's doing today to make sure small businesses are paid. So hopefully we're seeing less of that necessarily, but knowing that you're doing that, or knowing that you're not doing that too early. I work with some businesses that think it's great because I pay my home loan on time, or I sit in my own life and I buy food and pay for it up front, but they don't actually use the debt in their favour. So, you don't want to be paying your suppliers too early. And equally on the other side, you want to understand that the outstanding sales side of things, when you've got the accounts receivable, that you're actually getting paid in a timely nature. So you can measure that in a number of days through the calculation. And then obviously gross profit margin becomes an obvious one. Also on the operational side, I've talked about inventory turns a few times. That's one of my favourites coming from my background. But it's important in some businesses to really understand that. Now, again, if you're not somebody that's holding heavy inventory, it's not a big deal. But if you're a food or something that's got a life manufacturer, then making sure you turn over your product, not just from the increasing opportunity to sell, but also from the not writing off side of things is important. Obviously, a sell-through rate is important, so working through that. Cost per unit. So when you're looking at how to actually measure whether you're producing things at the right cost, then we need to have that. And you've got fixed and variable costs in there. Now, at a high level, that can obviously be averaged out over a number of units and so on. So it's okay because it's telling you the trend of whether you're going up or down in the side of costing things. And obviously, there's seasonal things that can impact that number. So knowing that's coming at you, there could be shortages. Timber for those people that have been dealing with that. Who would have thought that the Ukraine war was going to impact on wood? I certainly had no idea. I don't live in that industry, but those sorts of things come into those players. And then the cash to cash cycle time. So making sure you get that turned around. And there's other things there like end of month, understanding how that time is blowing out or not. So again, on the end of month ones, it's not listed here. I deal with organisations that have gone through their journey from smaller bookkeepers, supporting them into maybe a finance controller and then a CFO. And sometimes I'm amazed that same bookkeeper's gone on and grown into that role, which is great. But then you ask them about how long does it take them to close the month? And they're talking about 15 days. And you're like, wow, who would have done that? But it's what you know and what you're used to that drive those.
So there's some really good, I guess, examples of common metrics or KPIs that people are using, Rob. And I would imagine in most businesses, when an organisation is formulating their metrics, there'll be a few people, different people involved. It'll be a collective effort, perhaps. But when metrics are being suggested, or we're thinking about which ones we want to introduce, what sort of things should I be on the lookout for? What should I be asking myself and checking up on to make sure that we're bringing these in a way that sets us up for growth?
So this is, I think, to me, the most important part of the discussion today, because you can look up your own metrics, you can work out how to do things. I suspect most people can work out their goals, but these are the things that I've picked up over the years. So firstly, and this is not just about talking KPIs, it's also about talking reports and so on. It's a really strange thing that I note happens in the world, that people become heavily driven by preparing things. They actually enjoy it. Putting that report together a month or finding the facts and figures for that KPI and so on. And before you know it, you're investing a lot of effort in getting to a KPI to make a decision or use it from. So one of the things I would watch out is, don't overbuild and spend 5-10 days a month working out those numbers and then forget to actually do anything about it. So I think KPIs need to be something that takes less effort. We'll talk to that in the next slide. Around building. So watch out for that. And, watch out for I love preparing it factor, because that's what spreadsheets brings to the conversation. People that use spreadsheets to bring data together, they generally love filtering the data and playing around with it, myself included. I think there's a question of, just don't focus on KPIs that you're going to win with. There's plenty of people that can tell you that they're number one in something, and then they'll go away and set up KPIs that do that. So you might want one that tells you something that's becomes a competitive advantage sort of thing. But, the intent here isn't to pat yourself on the back and say, job well done. The intent also isn't to beat people up left, right, and centre, by the way. So for me, watch out for the things that just reinforce what you already know or pat you on the back, and look at the things that are actually going to challenge you and add value to achieving your goals. Again, that's the outcome here, achieve the goals. Is it visual? Can people actually see what's going on? So one of the things I know, and this happens, I think, in corporate organisations as well, people will go and build a set of KPIs to reflect where the organisation wants to go. It sits in an ivory tower. Maybe some managers are responsible for delivering that, but the people that actually impact it don't actually know what's going on. Now, there are very good organisations that do this stuff well. Workshops that have a big plasma screen that shows where jobs are at and so on. So that there are people that do this well, don't get me wrong. But think about your KPI. If you're not putting it out in front of people, then it's very difficult for those people that can impact it to take effect and do something. And the best example I've ever known is when Australia followed suit with other parts of the world and introduced lost time injuries. And you went to manufacturing sites, and I'm showing my age a little bit, and suddenly there were signs at the front when you drove in to say it'd been 50 days before an injury, or it'd been, God forbid, 2 days into death. Very visual, very clear, reinforcing every time people came to work that they had to do something here. So I think that stuff's important. Is your audience actually engaged and on board with the outcomes? So this comes back to the actual outcomes as well. If you've got outcomes that not everybody's supporting, and we've all been in organisations with, whether it be the management team itself or the team that's responsible for something like, say, the warehouse crew, you get people that aren't always on board and can't live with it. So that's life. But what you need to do is actually have KPIs that people can engage with and get on board, and reflect on the effort to actually get them to support the goal before you go too hard on the KPI. Because the KPI, again, is only about achieving those goals that you want to have. But there's a lot of studies, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that can say this, around how much can the human brain handle this information. The one I go with is 7. There's 7 things at any one time I can keep in my head and work on. So that's why we all create lists and focus things, to-dos, whatever it may be. So when you think about your KPIs, I'm going to differentiate here from metrics itself. You can have reporting metrics and you can have all different ways of seeing information sent back to you to do things with, but your core critical KPIs, you don't want 40 of them. You don't want to have too many that you can't actually focus on and build strategies around. What happens is you see things in KPIs, you need to do things. So in regular meetings, there should be actions that are developed to work out how to improve that. If you have too many, you just will get too many actions. And one thing we know in manufacturing world, when you're getting updates from systems, for example, telling you to fix things, if you build too many rules and you've got 100 updates coming out every morning for somebody to do something, they start ignoring it. They lose all focus on it and they don't do anything. So keep that focused around the right consumable number of KPIs for your organisation. I think balance is really critical to here. You don't want to overachieve. And the reality is some KPIs, as you go and improve that, will have an impact on other areas. So, for example, if we get on top of our inventory control and we run bare minimum inventory items, and we're really good at just-in-time ordering, but we also have a KPI that says we're growing by 30% in the markets and our warehouse needs to support it. You've got this tension around having extra stock to support sales as they come on board, or lose those sales and wait to pick them up later on if they come back to you. So really you want a balanced set of KPIs that talk about the business. So not just financial or operational, having the things that make better. The last one is, we all have done this. KPIs aligned to budgets, which are then aligned to my bonus, etc. And I'm managing delivery around part of that. And I start thinking, well, I want my bonus. So how do I build this number up? Now, it might be that it's manipulation, as in I'll just make it present a bit better. So one of the ones from my experience was DIFOT, delivered in full on time. When I worked in a food company, we had a number of divisions. And one division would say have 100 lines of items. They would measure it by each line. So when they got one line wrong, that order failed as such, right? But all the other lines they got right. So percentage-wise, it improved the outcome. Whereas another organisation would measure it by order. So we made a mistake on that order. So regardless of how, so you can see how one organisation would be looking at the same results but measuring it differently, so people do that, and don't underestimate the I guess not the fudging nature of people wanting to falsify numbers, but that can happen, but more the nature of people moving the numbers to look the way that they want it to look like, and sometimes that's subconscious as well. So I think from my experience, it's really important. If you've got to focus on achieving the goals, the KPIs need to reflect that, but they need to be things that you can actually work with, not just academic numbers that sit out in front of people.
moving on, I think that was really good. Some of those tips you just gave us, Rob, obviously come from your work across different industries with lots of different businesses. Your experience really shines through. So I guess I'd like to bring that forward a little bit and I guess gain some insights from you around what you're seeing in today's world, what's helping organisations to set, manage their KPIs, or the performance of their KPIs, and then I guess their overall performance.
Yeah, so I come to this conversation from my perspective around processes and systems and so on. So I think this is really important. My journey started many years ago. I worked for a poultry company in Adelaide. I still remember putting together or being part of the team that put together the board report every month. I kid you not, it was 220 pages. And I look back at it now and I go, what was that all about? And of course, we used to joke, well, I'll leave this graph out, no one will ever notice. And, we made mistakes, people didn't notice. That's the reality. Now this is, systems were around, don't get me wrong, systems weren't at the same level then. So there was a need to get some of that information through there. What I find interesting is that organisation I worked for consistently lost money year on year on year. It was an organisation that was in a very tough industry, driven very much by the market conditions that were there from different angles and built around 18 months of planning. But a new general manager came in and a new finance manager and myself, and we all set about saying, well, what are the things we need to do with this organisation? Not 50, what are the 3 things we need to do? And just to support what KPIs have, back then, and I don't think I thought of it in this framework, we worked out how to measure that. And we took the business on a journey. And one of my great situations from my point of view is working with those guys. I learnt what it was to actually do business change, real business change, and turn that into that state into a profitable state. And people would never have thought. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. One, just laziness, not wanting to fix it. Things that, no, we'll never change that. How many times do we hear that? Well, KPIs help you actually inform people about why they changed and so on. So today it's different. Today, in my world, the systems actually take a lot of that burden. So I talked earlier about preparation and people enjoying doing spreadsheets or whatever it may be. We want our solutions today to be able to take that workload away from us and reduce the effort around that. And they do that quite well. And to the next step, that it becomes more of a real-time concept. So yeah, there's some KPIs that aren't real-time by nature. They reflect a period of time, but there's others that are real-time. So systems will give you that inherent ability to see the business straight away and a reduced effort to get that information out. And what that does is, if you can get KPIs and metrics itself out easily and faster, you can then go have time to do other things, particularly fixing the problem you want to fix. Its systems are intuitive and give you a visual way to actually see or have feedback about the business via KPIs. So, good systems come out with dashboards today. They're pre-built. They're focused around roles that people have, finance, operation. So you get to leverage those that have gone before you. But they're also very much something you can configure and make suit the way you want to see the business at that time. And importantly, in a year's time or 2 years' time, whatever it is, when you want to adjust the way you're focused on the business. So you've gone through a growth phase. Now we're into a bedding it down phase and making sure our customers are happy. We probably don't need new states or new channels at this point in time. Systems will allow you to actually drive business rules, alerts, proactive things. So, for me, it takes the KPI past just the results to here's some things that we can do and be aware of that might actually adjust the KPI before we get to the end of the month. So if we're looking at out of stocks and there's some measurement around that or cannibalization and so on, getting feedback on a Tuesday in a week that some things aren't quite right allows you to take some steps and effort, order some more goods, whatever it is, rather than just waiting to the end of the week and go, oh, shit, we missed 100 units of sales on this sort of thing. I think I talked about the roles a second ago in the dashboard conversation or the presentation later, but systems today are much more leaning around supporting the roles people have around what they're doing. So yes, they used to be, ERPs were very financial driven. The operations were somebody else's domain. You had best of breeds. Obviously, in other sessions, we've talked about why ideally having one solution cover all that's important. But what you now get is the ability to have roles looked after, but you can actually have roles informed by what's happening in other areas. So, the warehouse person who's looking after some of the KPIs for inventory and so on can see some sales information coming to their dashboard. So it melds in those other factors that maybe they're not responsible for, but are part of whether they achieve their numbers, KPIs, and so on. I think the other thing that's important about systems, and there's a bit in systems, is the drillable nature. So it's accurate data. No one's putting a spreadsheet together, although you might have some examples of that. Still, it's bringing the data to the fore, but it allows you to drill through the data to actually investigate things and understand why a KPI has ended up in a place that it is, or why it's tracking towards that place. And then finally, there's a number of things systems will obviously do for businesses that are growing. But one of the things that I find intriguing is that question of what does AI or business learning, machine learning bring to this conversation as we go forward. Right now, this stuff is real. So, some of the solutions I work with, if we look at inventory as an example, and one of your issues that you're trying to stay on top of is not having a stock out that needs to be there. Systems can be built with, there's a basic max min concept, there's an economic order quantity. I only buy it in lots that make value for me, but the replenishment can be triggered by other more extensive algorithms that make sense. Whatever the reason is, if it suits your organization, you can automate that process. So right down to I don't need to double check it. We've got the right information in the system. When this trigger is triggered, go and get me the goods, raise a purchase order automatically. So today I see a lot of that is somebody reviews the purchase requirements before they go out and so on. These automation concepts are coming in and they're becoming more successful in business. Now you still have to look at the right goals for your business as to where you are in your journey. If you're not on top of your inventory, and if anybody ever doubts that conversation, the first thing I do is go and have a look at how clean your warehouse looks. And that tells me a number of things. Somebody says to me, I want to go to MRP, and I look at a warehouse that's all over the place, and it's like, you probably want to get a few things sorted out first. So there's some things for me. Look, there's plenty of others. We already know, everybody on this call knows that you can't live on bits of paper. And you've outgrown, some of those other business management solutions that have been over there at time that just focus on getting the finance right or raising an order. It's so much more coherent and so much more connected today in business. You need to have these things. So just coming back to the point, systems allow you to really build your KPIs into what you do on a daily basis and react accordingly to keeping them in the right place.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I think this is an interesting one. The question is, so we determined XYZ should be my KPI. How do we manage them? Is there a framework to manage KPIs? I think you've sort of touched on this, but just anything else you want to add around frameworks for managing KPIs?
Yeah, so I think, let's say high level rather than be too sort of specific as such. But, again, if you make sure it's a measurable thing and it relates to your goals, then you need to actually have that reported on accordingly and shown to the right audience. So one of the core things in there is if you've just defined, let's just say that you want to grow your business by bringing on new customers and so on. So that probably starts back with lead generation. As what do you do there? No, you might have some marketing things and other things that support that. But let's say that's lead generation. So what you need to do is you need to build in the vigilance to actually understand how to measure the things below the KPI, right? Because there's sub-measurements in there. So lead generation, one of my favorites, it starts with you need to have the right number rolling into the funnel. So, there's metrics around, I need 3 real opportunities before I get a sale in some organizations. For others, it's around, I need to get in front of people 100 times before that one person bites. So really it's about building a framework around measuring the right sub-measurements in there as such. And then as you go through, for me, it's about sharing that with the right people who can impact, because the point of having a goal is to actually achieve it. And you don't achieve it by sitting in a room and say a finance controller or whatever the role may be and expecting people down the shop floor doing things. So we need to share that information with them and then set tactics. So we've got this information that says for some reason we're always out of stock on these products from Brazil. Okay, what do we want to do about it? Set some actions around that. Is our supplier in Brazil the problem and we can't get there? Is it just the world tensions and the getting hold of containers, which was obviously more significant last year, an issue? But have tangible things to go and work on, and then make sure you know who's doing that, when they're doing it by, etc. Because that's key to that.
A few questions coming in on KPIs for specific industries. Someone said they're in project portfolio management. That's Amit again. And Troy has asked for some suggestions around KPIs for service-based businesses. Is it that simple, Rob, that you can sort of make some suggestions on particular industry, or is it far too organisation specific for that?
Yeah, look, it's probably tough at the moment. Here's some ideas, but I'm happy to have individual discussions about the sorts of things. KPIs are also relevant to not just the industry, but the organisation and where it sits in the industry. So if I start on the service one, so I'm not sure what that is, but let's just say it's going out and fixing up water heaters, just as an example, all right? So what are the things that are going to matter to a company that does that? So one of the points would be appointment times. If you're looking at customer satisfaction, then you probably want to make sure you're hitting those appointment times. So some maybe a KPI around how many appointments we miss over a week. Now, I'm making this up on the fly a little bit as a concept. The other thing is that you make money if it's fixed price on whether you're there for an hour or 2 hours. So again, looking at something that wraps up over all of your appointments in a given week, how many hours you're there. So it might be a budget versus actual view of the world. It simply might be we know we're an hour, and if we go half an hour over, we lose money, right? So there's different frameworks there. But I'm happy to have a bit of a deeper conversation with that. It really comes down to what's going to make a difference in your business, though, because there's no doubt, take a service industry, somebody that's maybe even your competitor doing very much the same thing may actually genuinely have different directions and strategies or goals that the KPIs need to be built for. I think the other one, there was service. What was the other organisation?
Project portfolio management.
Or project portfolio management, right. So I deal with a lot of projects as part of our discussions regularly, and I'm always amazed, and it doesn't matter what the project's delivering, by the way, the concept that the person running it knows everything. So that's just not true. If you look at construction projects as an example, right, sure, they know the work breakdown structure and they probably understand what their intentions are, etc. But what they're not seeing is, the deliveries that are going onto site that they're not there, that somebody's approving, or the purchases that are required from a dollar value and the price has gone up. So, for me, performance management around projects is critical, and having a dashboard, not just having a set of KPIs, but having something that's continually feeding back to you what's going on there. Now, I think, you've got your delivered on time metrics or KPIs for projects. You've got your variations as a percent of projects, depending on what your projects are, whether they matter and so on. If you're a program office dealing with more consulting type projects and so on, then you've got some other factors. But again, I'm happy to have a conversation with whoever that was that sort of brought that to attention.
Sure. Yep. So Troy, if you want to get in touch with Rob, by all means, take advantage of his expertise. Someone who hasn't provided a name has asked the question, how important are KPIs for helping move a small business to a bigger business? That's a good question, because we're talking about growth. Yeah. And one of the key phases, I guess, of growth is when you start from being a small business, looking to become that bigger business. What role do KPIs play in that at that smaller stage, Rob?
So if you just bring it up a level and think about what a KPI is, in my view, it's simply, in a very simple terms, we've set a goal. So small businesses have goals for their small business as well. Okay. Then we set up a KPI or a set of KPIs to measure how we're achieving against those goals. So they're essential. To sit there and say you can't grow without KPIs may not be right, might be a bit foolhardy. But I would argue out that more companies are going to have clarity about the next steps they take based on the information provided by the results for KPI or where a KPI is in a given. It aligns to your goal. So from a growth point of view, you need to have KPIs that match that strategy for growth. So if your growth is around new products, for example, so maybe you've got a fairly mature customer base, so you want to grow into a new category, and we see a lot of that today at the moment. We always do, where somebody that you can't believe Ndevr, who've done soap, are suddenly doing video games, or it's a silly example, but so they're growing into another category. So you need to measure that. So if you think about if that's your strategy for growth, then you need to measure, well, what's my speed to market with a product when we develop it, and what's the right number depends on the product there and where you see yourself going. Where we've missed opportunities to sell something because the stock's not there, we need to know that for new products, because new products don't get 5 chances. They might get one or might get a second one. There's many of great food products that have gone into Woolworths or Coles, did not have the back end structured to meet the manufacturing and just died on the vine. Or there's many examples I know personally where a new range has been bought for the company from maybe another region, but the states in Australia have decided, can't be bothered about doing that. So, having KPIs that tell you what your sales force is actually up to. So I think for anybody that's growing, any business that has grown, but particularly the smaller ones getting up to be the mid-sized ones, it's just absolutely essential. Don't have too many. Don't over-focus on it's the only thing you do, but you need to be getting feedback around how that business is going. Growth is hard, painful. And you sort of grow in steps and ratchet forward rather than just a nice, easy bring on an extra resource or two. You get hit. So you need some leading stuff as well that says, gee, I better be bringing some people into the warehouse or the warehouse is not big enough, whatever it may be.
Thanks, Rob. Michael's asked around non-financial KPIs. I think we probably covered that pretty well. But Michael, if you feel like you want some other examples, get in touch with us. We're happy to run through that.
Yeah, I just probably add to that for Michael, though. I think in some ways, organisations that are early on their journey probably have some financial KPIs in place, even if they're not rigorous. That's probably an area where they start, right? I'm more interested in, if you want the guys in the factory or the warehouse or the shipping distribution side, whatever it may be, to do things, then you need to actually build up some thoughtful stuff around it. And then, the non-financial stuff, you should keep saying, is this the right stuff? Particularly in the early days when you're installing it, working out whether it is a good feedback for whether the business is doing well.
Someone's asking, what could be a good typical B2B marketing team, and that's not sales teams, but KPIs in recruitment services? Is that too specific for you to answer, Rob, or can you throw some ideas out there for us for someone looking for marketing KPIs in recruitment?
In recruitment. So it's not an area I deal a lot with, by the way, but I would happy to have that conversation with the person. But just off the top of my head, so, we're talking about getting in front of enough people. So that you'd think there'd be some KPIs about how you keep your database fresh from a recruitment point of view. There's probably something around how effective your marketing from, say, LinkedIn campaigns and so on is being. But, look, it's probably not an area where I spend a lot of time recruitment, but happy to have a conversation and talk through some ideas.
Thanks, Rob. The question is, are there any pitfalls with KPIs?
There's lots, because I think whilst I'm sitting here speaking the importance of KPIs, it is not your strategy itself. It's a way to your goals that you want to do. So for me, some of those are pitfalls. Spend too much preparing the information behind it, making sure that you have the ones that challenge you and make you a better organisation in line with your goals, rather than the ones that make you feel good. I like tension in my world, good tension, by the way, I hope. So for me, it's about you want to be on a bit of an edge. You want to be going forward. They're also not everything. So I don't want to ever take away that whilst I don't think business should be run by gut feel, there's a reality that some people have been around in your business for many years and have great insights and can read the sciences and things. So don't make it the only way you run the business. It's part of reporting on the business and feeding back about the business, and I think it's essential, but there's other things that you need to do. You might have KPIs for this, but, putting your arm about your staff and making sure they're happy in their roles and their training trajectories and all that may not sit in your growth strategies, but if you don't do those things, you'll just lose staff. and you won't achieve those. So I think there's a heap of things to watch out for. One thing I would also say is don't go too fast too early. I'm a big believer in ratcheting forward. So, if you're putting in some that the business is not used to having, it's going to feel painful. It's going to feel, what the hell are you watching me for in some parts of your business? So choose a few that are really logical for where you want to go in the next 6 months, 12 months, etc., and work on getting them right before you add on other ones down the line. But again, happy to talk to that person. Super.
Thanks, Rob. All right, now, probably one of the key KPIs we all look at is the number of coffees we've had per day. And maybe there's a number of people on this presentation right now who are falling behind on that KPI count. So we'll let everyone go and grab a coffee, recharge, get on with the rest of your day. We will be reaching out just to check in. Hopefully you've enjoyed the presentation, get some feedback from you. So when we do that, just let us know if you're keen to chat with Rob. He's very generous with his time. We'll happily have a chat with you. So I would recommend you take up that opportunity, get some advice for your business, and just have a chat. Rob's a great person to chat with about all things, but KPIs, systems, ERP systems, great wealth of knowledge. So I'd recommend that. Rob, thanks very much for your presentation today. We will be running further sessions, so watch out for invites. We'd love to have you join other sessions presented by Ndevr in the coming weeks and months. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.